welcome to 365 in the Word, a Capital City Christian Church podcast in Jefferson City, Missouri. My name is Elijah Odell. I'm joined by my friend Frank Geringer. We are both a part of the pastoral team here at Capital City. And at Capital City this year, we are a church on mission to encounter Jesus, to become like Jesus, and to love like Jesus. And this year we are especially doing that. One of the ways we're doing that is through an initiative called 365 in the Word. So as a church family, we are intentionally spending time with God in His Word each day in 2026 using the daily Bible as our guide. This week, we are in episode 28, week 28, and we were looking at the content covered in the daily Bible from July 9th to July 16th. And we are totally in the book of Isaiah. We have not read anything but the book of Isaiah this last week. And today especially, we are reading the book of Isaiah, studying the book of Isaiah. But this week's question to open us up, Frank, is this. If you were appointed the absolute judge of one trivial debate, like is a burrito a sandwich or does pineapple belong on pizza? What debate are you settling?
Yes, pineapple does belong on pizza.
Oh, he's going to settle that one just as a side settle. What trivial debate, if you were an absolute judge of it, which one would you settle once and for all?
What a great question, and what a great thing to think about being the absolute judge over something. Being able to decide. Like just having that kind of...
Yeah, not even the President of the United States has that power.
No,
he can't tell you whether pineapple belongs.
It would be amazing. There's a bunch of them that I think that come to mind. iPhone versus Android is a big one. I have a lot of family members who we can't FaceTime because they don't have iPhones.
Yeah, those green texters.
Yeah, those green texters.
My dad is staunchly against the blue text message. Is he? He totally could switch. It's the most convenient it's ever been, but he just does it to spite us, I think.
No, sure. Anyway, there's a lot of them. There's a lot of fun ones. There's a lot of philosophical ones. There's a lot of, but I'm going to go with, if I were to be able to, for the sake of my wife, I would make the judgment of the greatest basketball player of all time. I would once and forever nail down the Michael Jordan versus LeBron James debate.
Now, why for my wife? Yeah.
Because my wife lived in Illinois in the 1990s, and she was in love with Michael Jordan. Not in love. She was loved. A diehard. Yeah. Went to the Jordan restaurant, had the jersey. And if you're living in Illinois in the 90s, everybody was a diehard Bulls fan. But yes, I would make the definitive judgment that there is no debate here that Michael Jordan is the greatest basketball player of all time.
I think a lot of the people my age and younger, it seems like 14-year-old boys have really strong opinions about this. But,
I have a 14-year-old son who is not on our side with this.
But I think if you want to voice an opinion about this is me not knowing anything or caring at all about these two basketball players and who wins. You have to have witnessed their seasons in your lifetime, because you can say whatever you want about highlight reels.
Sure.
But will you really ever know if somebody's the greatest if you didn't experience just the sheer, mass of media surrounding them? I mean, look at the brand that Jordan has built.
Nobody revolutionized a sport like Michael Jordan revolutionized basketball. So anyway, that's the one I would choose. I would say Michael Jordan is the greatest of all time. And if anybody wants to have a conversation about that, I'll do it anytime.
He just put his sign out. Go ahead and change his mind in the comments.
Yes.
If you think LeBron James is better, or somebody else, I guess. But is there nobody else really comes into the debate?
I mean, there's plenty of other people in the conversation, but those are the two that surface.
Yeah. I only know basketball players that have shoe brands. So LeBron and Jordan, and
I would throw
Curry,
Kobe Bryant into the conversation personally. And if I was choosing, I would take Kobe Bryant over LeBron James. But
really,
I'm just throwing it out there to trigger some people.
Wow.
But genuinely, I would. Anyway, so
I'm throwing it out there to trigger, but also because I believe it's true.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, you. If you were the absolute judge,
so I have
what
two.
trivial debate are you settling once and for all?
I have two, and I think they're just as probably more. They're actually probably more important than the basketball thing. No, I'm just kidding. But do you put the milk before the cereal, or the cereal before the milk. And there's a caveat to this one for me. I think you always put the cereal first. But I'm a heavy milker, I will say that. I mean, I put a lot of milk in there, and I enjoy the milk after the bowl is finished.
Okay.
But the only time it's okay to have milk first and then cereal is when you're going for your second bowl.
Yeah, refill.
So I would say always the cereal goes first. And it's a similar philosophy on the other trivial debate that I want to respond to, and that is wetting your toothbrush. Do you wet your toothbrush pre-toothpaste or post-toothpaste?
Sure.
I know there's some psychotic person out there who doesn't wet it at all, just goes in dry. And that's disgusting, and I don't know how.
Yeah, I don't know.
There was a girl I went to school with in high school. I'm not going to name her because, we're a big podcast here. I don't want to embarrass anybody. But she didn't use toothpaste, and she had pearly white teeth. I don't know how it was possible, but she
just the brush?
Just the brush. She said her dentist said, you could do it if you just really brushed well.
Interesting.
But I don't know if I could feel clean that way.
I've never heard that.
Yeah, I mean that'd be like taking a shower with just the loofah. No soap. You're just scrubbing you're just getting your dead skin off.
Yeah.
But yeah, I say you have to put the toothpaste on and then wet it.
Yeah.
Because I like what happens. There's this chemical reaction that happens when the water hits the toothpaste and sinks the toothpaste down into the bristles.
Right.
The weight of the water. So you have this kind of prolonged action with the toothpaste that, anyway.
Yeah.
I think
definitely wet my toothbrush after I put my toothpaste on.
Yeah. Yeah. And and we're also both over the roll toilet paper users. But not everyone has the wisdom and discernment that we do. And that's okay. And that's all right. We're all different stages. No, the reason that I bring these questions up is because we do have someone named as an absolute judge in our reading this week, and in a pretty particular passage. I think it's amazing what happens here. So like I said, we're all in the book of Isaiah, and specifically we were in Isaiah 42, but the passage that I want to read is Isaiah 42, 1 through 4. So this is the first of the suffering servant passages, which are messianic passages about Jesus, but specifically labeling him as a suffering servant, which kind of boggled the minds of Jewish interpreters for a time, so much so that there were some Jewish people that thought this isn't about the Messiah at all.
Right.
It can't be. Why would our Savior suffer? So this is what Isaiah 42, 1 through 4 says. Here is my servant whom I uphold, my chosen one in whom I delight. And I will put my spirit on him, and he will bring justice to the nations. He will not shout or cry out or raise his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, a smoldering wick he will not snuff out. In faithfulness he will bring forth justice. So this is where he's kind of talked about as the absolute judge. He will not falter or be discouraged until he establishes justice on earth. So he's an absolute judge. In his teaching, the islands will put their hope. So there's a lot of really cool things that happen in this text. But we see that Jesus, the suffering servant, the Messiah, even though it's not named that this is Jesus, he is talking about Jesus, and he's talking about him as an absolute judge. And there's some really neat things. It says he will bring justice to the nations in the very first verse. But then it says later he will bring justice on earth. So justice over everything, total judge authority. And in his teaching, the islands will put their hope. And I think it's interesting that the islands are mentioned here. We'll get to that in just a second. But first, a kind of history of interpretation here. So rabbinic tradition, the tradition of the rabbis, which was not like all of Hebrew interpreters. It was just post Old Testament being completed and canonized. You had this group, the rabbis. In Judaism specifically, not all of the Hebrew faith, but just the Jews, of the tribe of Judah, of kind of later Hebrew faith. They heavily debated the servant's identity. Many of them saw the servant as just a personification of righteousness, a personification of the righteous remnant of Israel. So kind of like calling all of Israel, like even just the fact that the nation is named after a man, Jacob, who changed his name to Israel. Right. Some people say that this is about him. This is about them suffering in exile, but tasked with bringing the light of monotheism and biblical ethics to the rest of the Gentiles. But there are other ancient Jewish texts. Some of the older ones, like one called the Targum Jonathan, which is an early Aramaic paraphrase that explicitly adds the word Messiah to verse 1. So they doctor the text, right? That's not in the text. But it says in the Targum Jonathan, so they obviously interpret it this way, behold my servant the Messiah, instead of behold my servant whom I uphold. So that's kind of an interesting thing, is that there was even debate all the way back then. But as far as Christian exegesis goes, as far as the Christian interpretation, Christians unanimously view Jesus of Nazareth here as the fulfillment of this text. And there's a lot of different reasons for that, but the most important is Jesus' quotation of this text in Matthew chapter 12. So he quotes it to explain why he heals people, but then frequently tells them, don't tell anybody, don't tell them to stay quiet about it, because Matthew saw Jesus' refusal to start this loud, violent geopolitical rebellion against Rome as the direct fulfillment of that line that says, he will not shout or cry out. Yeah. He will not raise his voice in the streets. So this is Jesus trying to quell the rebellion. You know, he comes in a different way, in a slower, smaller, more steady way. So kind of some kind of cool historical context about that. He will not shout or cry out, because with a prophecy like this, there's kind of a dual fulfillment. Isaiah was speaking to the Judeans. He was speaking to the tribe of Judah, and had a particular message for them, but then there's also this double fulfillment in the messianic sense.
Sure.
So in the Babylonian context...
And can that also, he will not shout or cry out, of course, because Isaiah 53, which we'll get to next week, is another suffering servant.
Right.
And it really specifically speaks about the cross, but in Isaiah 53, it talks about how he would be silent.
Like a lamb led to slaughter. Yeah.
So you sort of have this in his ministry. He wasn't boisterous. He wasn't.
Right, but there's also specifically in his crucifixion,
which we'll get to. But.
Yeah, and I think both of those there's some overlap in them. But there's also this is unique in the sense that it's talking specifically about his role as judge rather than his role as the not fill-in sacrifice, but as the representative sacrifice.
Atonement.
So the atoning sacrifice. Thank you. So the Babylonians, their kings were loud in that context. The original audience of these chapters, they saw kings issue booming decrees and huge royal processions and trumpets and heralds, and the conquerors shouted in the streets about who they had conquered. But Jesus' approach was a radical subversion of imperial propaganda, and that's what Isaiah was also calling the remnant of Israel to be, this slow and steady ethical worship of God. Yeah. That was how the kingdom would advance. So the kingdom advances quietly and through very low-key restoration. But this is really neat. Mentioned in verse 4, I mentioned the in his teaching the islands will put their hope, which I also think is cool that it says in his teaching. You don't hear Jesus talked about as teacher very often unless we're in the Gospels. Right. But his teaching is what we build our lives on.
Right. And in the Great Commission, to obey all that
I've taught you. Yeah. So these islands refer to the coastlands of the Mediterranean Sea. So Isaiah is in the land of Judah. If anything, he's teaching some people on the other side, on the eastern side of the Jordan River, but most everybody is on the west side of the Jordan River, in between that river and the Mediterranean Sea. So kind of pretty narrow space. Yeah. This piece of history is not just the whole ancient world, but those coastlands, places like Cyprus and Greece and Tarshish, to an ancient Israelite or those who are exiled in the landlocked Babylon, these places represented the farthest reaches of the world. Yeah. So it's to us the Papua New Guinea. Sure. It's Australia. It's Antarctica. It's as far as you can go without being where you are. But this also kind of establishes the universal rather than just strictly nationalistic, only for the Israelites kind of hope. Right. This is the servant's mission to everybody, which is, I think, a powerful truth we see all over in the New Testament. Sure. It was for the world that God loved, that he sent Jesus as his
go into all the nations.
Yeah.
And
we see it in the Old Testament
in Judea, Samaria, to the ends of Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria,
and from the very beginning, Abraham was meant to be a blessing to the nations. So it's in both Testaments pretty clearly. But this is the last thing that I'll mention. This is, I think, really cool. So the line, a bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out. So this is another instance of an idiom. This is a word picture of normal daily life in this part of the world, in this time of the world. So in the ancient Near East, these reeds, a bruised reed, he's talking about like a hollow reed that would grow on the side of a riverbank. And these hollow stalks, they grew abundantly along the riverbanks, and they were used for all different kinds of things. They were very incredibly common. They were cheap, but they were really useful. They're in some sense, they're almost like bamboo. That was how they were utilized. They were used for everything.
Yeah.
A thinner reed could be turned into a pen or a musical flute. We have evidence of those, artifacts, archaeological artifacts. We also have stronger reeds. They were measuring rods. They were walking sticks. And so we're very similar to bamboo in that way. But if a reed gets bent or cracked, everybody would just throw it away. I mean, it was a very renewable resource. You could get hundreds of them. Nobody charged. It was just on the bank of the river. It was very easy to get. It's like a dandelion, but it had maybe a little bit more use to it. Because if you lean on a bruised walking stick, it'll crack and you'll fall. If you blow into a bruised flute, then the air leaks out. It won't play a tune. The pen will leak ink. It won't write correctly. So the standard practical reaction was to simply snap the reed in half, throw it into the fire. At least it could be used as fuel. But in this sense, the bruised reed represents people who have been battered and kind of bent by life. So Isaiah is preaching to the Israelites, but he's also preaching once again to the nations. Yeah. And I kind of think about the Statue of Liberty, on Ellis Island, this whole like bring your broken, bring your weary, bring your bruised and your tired. I don't actually think those are the words, but
tattered
masses. Yes, the tattered masses.
I think that might be in there.
Jerry Seinfeld, I think, adds in the bad at driving, the rude, the people who talk with food in their mouth. Any of those people, but anyway. So the bruised reed is a representative of someone who's a little damaged, a little broken. And this could mean physical oppression. It could mean poverty. It could mean spiritual exhaustion or deep personal failure. It could also just mean they're suffering, like those who are in exile right now, but especially to the ruthless empires of Babylon and Rome. They looked to this prophecy all the time, like, yes, he will free us because we are the bruised reeds. Mm-hmm. And also, they are also the smoldering wick, which we'll get to in just a second. But the world says, snap it off, throw it away. And the servant steps in and binds up that fracture and restores the reed to usefulness. So it says, your brokenness does not define you. We're going to continue to use you. That's what the Messiah is said to do here. In the same way, similar, it's a twin illustration of the smoldering wick. These ancient Near Eastern houses were lit completely by oil lamps with a little bit of olive oil in them, and they used a strand of flax as a wick. So picture kind of like a wheat stalk. And as long as there was oil, the flame would burn really brightly. But when the oil ran dry, then the flame would die down to a tiny little glowing ember, and it would just smoke. It would just smolder and smoke, and it would make your house smoky. So when it started to smoke, when it wasn't flaming anymore, that was one, your cue, you need to fill it with oil, and two, you need to get a new wick.
Right.
But it was a strand of straw. It was the cheapest thing you could get.
Right. So
when a wick reaches that point, it became actually a nuisance. It became an irritant. And, they would just wet their fingers and pinch it out. They would snuff it. But the smoldering wick, in some ways, it represents the same thing that the bruised reed does. But there's this metaphor kind of adds a layer to it. Like, yes, the person has lost their spark. They've lost their hope and their faith and their vitality. But they're also, a smoldering wick is irritating. It's like the smoke is getting in their eyes. People who are deeply broken and grieving and struggling can sometimes be viewed by society at large as a burden. That's why the Statue of Liberty says that, because nobody else wants people like that. But in
I think it's
America,
it's
huddled masses.
Yeah, they're groups of people.
Yes, we will take you in all at once.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's part of what America is amazing in that way, and its history in that we were a nation founded on refugees and immigrants, and it was escape. They were escaping their countries to get here, and so. The rest of the world kind of sees refugees in a very negative light, or a lot of the world sees it that way, and that was the same way then as well. So these broken people were the smoldering wick, they were the bruised reed.
Yeah.
But when paired together, these idioms establish that the servant's kingdom is built in restorative mercy and grace. Yeah. He doesn't judge you based off your usefulness. He judges you based off of your value. Which only he determines. Yeah. And I think it's cool too, because there's kind of this twin in verse 4. It says he won't throw out the bruised reed, he won't break the bruised reed, and he himself will not be discouraged. But it's the same word, it's bruised. Again, he himself won't be bruised. Mm-hmm. He won't snuff out the dim or smoldering wick, and he himself will not falter or grow dim. So it's actually Yarutz and Keha, and then Yeke and Ratsuts. Those are the same root words, which is really cool. Basically, it's like, he won't judge you for being dim, and he will never dim.
Yeah.
And he won't judge you for being broken, and he will never break.
Yeah.
Which is really powerful. So Jesus is the image of bringing infinite and enduring strength to the most fragile people in society, which is the gospel when you
right.
Really
I love the thinking about his ministry is not going to be loud and boisterous.
Yeah.
Like that's why he told people after healing, hey, don't go tell anybody.
Yeah.
Right, my time has not yet come. But also when you think about this prophecy, which again, 700 some years before Jesus is even born.
Yeah.
You think about this prophecy, and then you think about, I immediately am seeing this image of the Sermon on the Mount when Jesus is giving the Beatitudes, and it tells us what kinds of people were gathered around him.
Yeah.
And they were the outcasts and the sick and the hurting and the broken. And he's here saying, blessed...
Tax collectors and prostitutes.
Yeah. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the kingdom. He is speaking to a group of people that are the bruised reeds, that are the broken, and that's it. That kind of brings the crowds that gathered around him. That kind of brings it more to light. Yeah, the huddled masses around Jesus were those kinds of people. Yeah, and I think that's kind of a cool. I've never seen that in that text.
And I think this just is like a quick little 4-verse study in an Old Testament book that teaches us so much about Jesus and about his ministry. And obviously this is an application of reading the Old Testament through the New Testament, which when you read it chronologically like this, you don't do necessarily. But next year you will, because you've just finished the New Testament and you would go back into the Old Testament. And that's what's cool about doing a Bible reading, but then also studying with friends and listening to the sermons at church and
connecting all those dots.
So that's what I got into this week. This is one of the coolest idioms probably I've ever ran into, just because of how direct it is a reference to Jesus and what we can see about his ministry in the gospel. So what about you? What did you study this week?
I love the Isaiah text. I am just a little foreshadowing. Next week in our reading, we are going to get to Isaiah 53.
Yeah.
The very, very famous suffering servant passage. But I am going to be actually leaning into a very specific verse, Isaiah 54 verse 1, which I'm very excited to talk about next week, but that's we'll leave that for next week. Because Isaiah 54:1 actually informs my personal theology of singleness in the kingdom of God.
Wow.
Which I'll get to next week.
Singleness as in like romantic singleness?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll get to that. But
nobody read ahead.
No, but today what I want to do, I want to focus on our first day's reading, July 10th reading. And there's a very interesting story about King Hezekiah. And King Hezekiah, we see this story, Isaiah 38. There's a section of Isaiah 38 that refers to the story, but also 2 Kings 20 and 2 Chronicles chapter 32 kind of give us the narrative of it. But it is the story in King Hezekiah's life where Isaiah comes to Hezekiah and basically says, your days are near, you're going to die soon. And Hezekiah goes and prays to God and prays that God would extend his life, that God would heal him, and God does. God grants that, and Hezekiah lives for 15 more years. Mm-hmm. And I'm reading the story, and I immediately begin thinking about, I don't know how many times, even this week, I have talked to people who are going through some sort of sickness or illness, and they are asking to be prayed for. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, man, okay, of course we believe in the power of prayer. We ask God. We believe that God is powerful. We believe that God can heal. Yeah. And then I read the story like this, and I'm like, here's a very specific instance where Hezekiah's life is extended because he turned to God in prayer. And then in Isaiah 38, we read this prayer of thanksgiving from Hezekiah to God. Anyway, so I'm thinking through, okay, man, we pray for healing a lot. Also, there are many times that people aren't healed. Mm-hmm. So how can we understand all of that as we think about a story like this and as we think about the power of God in our lives and the power of prayer even in something like physical healing? So I just wanted to talk about that a little bit because I think that's something that many people ask about, think about, and we pray for people who are ill. We pray for people who are going through different sicknesses. But Hezekiah's story here shows us both the reality of divine healing and the tension of human expectation in that. Because there is a tension that we feel with, man, is God going to heal or not? Can he? Does he not? He did here, he didn't here, and what do we do with that? So here's just a few thoughts, some simple application when we face illness or hardship. I think the first thing that we can take from this story is we all should pray honestly and boldly to God when it comes to these things. Hezekiah in the story wept and pleaded with God, and that was right, and God responded. So when you're going through hardship, when you're going through an illness, when a family member or a friend is, pray honestly and boldly to God. That is the right thing to do. Secondly, we need to trust God fully. And this is where it gets difficult, because whether God heals or not, God is still good, God is still sovereign, and as we look at the whole of the scriptural text, especially what we've read up to this point, we see this. We see God's faithfulness, we see God's goodness, and we see God's sovereignty. And then thirdly, I think we need to be ready to receive both a miracle and the means of the miracle. Because in the story, God healed Hezekiah, but he also used a physical remedy. It's very interesting. It talks about how Isaiah told Hezekiah to go make a fig. I think the word is pronounced poultice. It's like a ointment made out of like herbs and things like that he put on some of his boils, and it healed him. Now was that the herbs healing or God healing? Like, I think, well, God created all of it. Yeah. So like it obviously there's this kind of divine thing that's going on. But sometimes our healing comes through means that, we have because we have medical advancements and all of those things. And we need to praise God for those things. We need to thank God for the people that are working and developing different medicines and different all those things, and that is a good thing. I mean, the amount of people that are protected and life extended today versus 100 years ago because of all of that, it's vast. Yeah. And we need to thank God for that, because I think that is a kind of a divine grace and blessing in all of our lives. But Hezekiah's healing here, it reminds us of a few things. Number one, it reminds us that God is not distant, that God hears and God responds. So that's why it's right for us to pray boldly and to plead with God. And God can intervene in ways that defy natural expectations. Because at the end of the story, as a sign, Isaiah says to King Hezekiah, hey, how do shadows move? Do they move forward or backwards? Yeah. And he specifically says how are shadows going to be moving on these steps? And well, the shadows always move forward. He says, just so that you know that your healing came from God, watch what the shadow does. And God moves the shadow backwards. Yeah. Shadows don't move backwards. And so God almost kind of gives this divine sign of reversing the shadow to show that God can intervene in ways that defy natural expectations. Nature, yeah. And there are times when I've heard so many stories where people go into the doctor's office and the doctor's like, listen, I don't know how to explain this, but, right? And those stories, just gone. And those stories are beautiful. We should celebrate them, and they should teach us that prayer matters and that God does respond. And God responded to Hezekiah's prayer here. And so we should pray with faith. I think it's right to specifically ask for healing, and it's right for us to believe that God is able. But the tension is, okay, but what about those times where I'm not healed, or a friend passed away because of a disease, or whatever it might be? That's where the tension surfaces for us. But I also think that this same story helps us stay grounded and helps us maintain the proper perspective, because even though Hezekiah was healed, we read a story, he still later died, right? I mean, his life was extended, but he still died. There are other scriptures all throughout the Bible that point to the fact that God doesn't fully always just heal everybody all the time, right? Paul's example of, man, I've got this thorn in my flesh. There's some sort of physical ailment. It wasn't healed. Healing is not promised in every circumstance in this life. And so we have to make sure that we avoid assuming that a lack of healing equals a lack of faith.
Yeah.
Okay? Because that's not biblical.
Yeah.
We have to avoid treating God like a formula or a guarantee.
He's not a genie.
Not a genie, right? And we also have to avoid building our theology only on the miraculous, or what we might call the miraculous. And
you can't build a rule based off of the exceptions to the rule.
Right,
so when God breaks the laws of nature, he's made them so he can do whatever he wants with them.
Absolutely.
But we can't just then rewrite the laws as if it's no longer the case.
Right. So when it comes to this concept, here's just what I would encourage those who are listening to think about through a balanced approach, kind of building off of this story in Hezekiah's life, is that number one, I think a healthy and biblical approach and posture looks like this. Number one, we need to pray with expectation. God, I know you can heal. Mm-hmm. And so whatever hardship, whatever illness, we plead and we pray specifically before God. Secondly, we submit with trust. I trust even if what I'm praying for, the answer is not yes. I'm going to trust. I kind of think about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fire, right? Hey, we believe that God can save us from the fire.
And if
but
not,
even if he doesn't, right? Like that posture, you see that in the lives of some of these faithful characters in the Old Testament. And that's the posture that we need to have. We need to have I submit to you with trust. And then thirdly, we rest in God's greater purpose. Because healing is not God's ultimate promise to us. God's ultimate promise to us is restoration. And that is fully realized in eternity, right? When we have a glorified body, where we are in the presence of God, and we're living in an environment where there is no pain, and there is no sickness, and there is no death. That's the ultimate promise. Healing here on this earth isn't God's ultimate promise. And so having that kind of reality that I'm resting in God's greater promise and greater purpose, which is restoration of all things in the new heavens and new earth.
Yeah.
And so making sure that perspective is staying in our minds together. And then ultimately, we need to be willing to hold both truths together. God heals, and God is still good if that healing doesn't come in this life. And so I think that's a really healthy, biblical, balanced approach to this conversation of, man, when I'm sick or when I have a family member who is ill, how do I handle that? What do I do? What can God do? And this story of Hezekiah, I think, kind of gives us some insight into that. So we ask God for healing with bold faith, but we anchor our hope in his character, not in a specific outcome. And when we can kind of hold those things together, I think that is a biblical and grounded approach that is balanced as we face the brokenness and the disease and the illness and sicknesses that we experience in this broken world. But recognizing that this broken world is being renewed, and one day God's ultimate promise of restoration of all things is coming, and that's the greater hope that we hold on to.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, anyway, just some thoughts. When I read that story, I was like, man, that's cool. He was sick, about to die, and he prayed, and God was like, here, you can have 15 more years. And we all would love that.
Yeah.
And maybe even God grants us that.
Minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. But I do think that from this story, it kind of helps us think through some of those questions and some of those tensions that surface in our lives as we think about God and his power.
You know, Hezekiah was given 15 more years with 15 more years of purpose. You know, and work like God said, you know what? Yes, and I'm going to utilize your story for another 15 years. I still need you on the throne. I still need you to be my servant in this world. You know, and sometimes our time is better spent in heaven. Sometimes our time is better spent with him. You know, and there's not a need for us to continue to work. We've done our part and portion of whatever the plan is. But
Yeah.
that's great.
Yeah.
That's so good. Really great application, just for our daily
Yeah.
attitude and perspective about prayer and about praying for miracles, which I think we should and do.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
well, that is what we have for you this week. There were no questions that came up in the email, although I know that some of you are disappointed that Bobby is not with us this weekend. And so please make sure you give her a hard time if you see her in person at church. Let her know that you miss her on the podcasts. But otherwise, you can always email your questions to us at nextsteps@capitalcitychristian.net. Just make sure you put podcast 365, whatever, something in the headline subject in the subject line to let us know that you are questioning something on the podcast. We would love to answer whatever we can here and now. But until then, keep reading the Daily Bible, and we will see you next week.